With today's lesson, we end our study of the amazing Gospel of John with an amazing scene and a discussion that takes place between Jesus and the Apostle Peter. And I hope that this story and this conversation will be a challenge to all of us today as we challenge ourselves because we believe in the message that this Gospel of John has given to us, that we believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that we can have life in his name only if we choose to allow that faith to be put into action, that it causes us to love Jesus and to decide that we're going to follow him and show him our love by ministering to his people and doing the things that are the most important things to him. As we begin this lesson, of course, in the last lesson, we saw the great resurrection of Jesus, and we saw the Apostle Thomas, who had doubts, but his doubts were totally erased when he stood face to face with Jesus. And he fell down before him saying, "My Lord and my God." And he believed. But Jesus said, "That's great that you believe, but blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." And that's you and me. We have not seen Jesus face to face with our own eyes, but we do believe in him. Now, in today's lesson, we're going to go by the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias, and we're going to see the apostles together in an amazing thing that was very similar to what they'd done in the past, but Jesus uses the occasion to challenge Peter and to challenge all of us in our decision to truly follow Jesus. And I hope you'll open your hearts as we open our Bibles to see this amazing scene. And we're going to put the verses up on the screen where you can see them. And we're going to read them as we go along and invite you to turn in your Bibles if you'd like to look. And the passages on our screen are going to be coming from the English Standard Version. And let's join this amazing scene here. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, that would be James and John, and two others of his disciples were together. Now, we're not sure where the other four disciples were, but the majority of the disciples were together here at this point. We know from the other gospel accounts that Jesus had told them to go to Galilee and wait for him there, and that he would meet them there and they would see him there. So obviously that's what they did. They went back to Galilee and they're waiting for Jesus. Don't know exactly how long it had been, but obviously enough time had passed that Peter decides he wants to go fishing. Verse 3, Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We'll go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Now we can understand why Peter may have become a little restless, got to do something. Maybe funds were running out. They needed to do something that was going to hopefully maybe get them some money that they could sell some fish and be doing what would be a profit to them. But for whatever reason, Peter says, "I'm going fishing." He was a fisherman. He knew how to do that. That was a familiar world to him. The boats and the nets and the business that they had left behind to follow Jesus was still being operated by James and John's father, Zebedee. The other gospel accounts tell us that he was the one who actually owned the boats and the nets. And when they left the first time to go follow Jesus, they left them with James and John's father, Zebedee. So the boats are still there. The opportunity's still there. They get in the boat, they go out and they go fishing, and they fish all night and they don't catch a thing. This has happened before, and we're going to see that a similar outcome happens again. But you can imagine, as they have worked all night, caught nothing, probably gotten discouraged. Not the first time, obviously, that this had happened to them. Peter didn't always get a great catch of fish when he went out fishing. But as the day comes, there appears a figure standing on the shore, close enough to call out to them for them to understand what he's saying. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Far enough away, they didn't recognize who it was, but Jesus called to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." Interesting that he addressed them as children. Should have given them a clue at this point. Just your average guy is probably not going to use this term to address people that he didn't know. But Jesus has a suggestion for them. He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." And for whatever reason, they decided to listen to him and do what this person standing on the shore told them to do. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. You've heard of the term deja vu, where it seems like something like this has already happened before. They probably were feeling a sense of this because 3 years before, when Jesus first called them to be his disciples, Jesus had told Peter, after a night of fishing all night and not catching anything, "Put out your nets for a catch." He was hesitant, but because Jesus said so, he went ahead and did it. Got the others involved, went out. When they pulled in that net, it was heavy with a huge catch of fish, so much that they couldn't even handle it in the one boat. Got James and John to come over there and help them. And it was then that Jesus, after they'd come to the shore with that huge amount of fish, or actually when they were still in the boat and Peter says, "Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man." When he realized this was caused by Jesus, Jesus looked at him and said, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you're going to be catching men." We find this story in Luke chapter 5. And it says at that point, Peter, Andrew, James, John, they all left the boats, the net, the fish, and they went to follow Jesus. It was the catch of a lifetime. This was money in the bank. This was not just bragging rights to say, "I caught a big, huge amount of fish." And that's what they did for a living. This is what they would dream of. But yet, because Jesus called them, they left the boats, the nets, the fish, and they walked away from it to follow Jesus. Well, now it's happened again. Jesus has given them once again the catch of a lifetime. And when this deja vu feeling happens, we know that John first understood this has got to be Jesus. That disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." You remember John was the first one that when he got to the tomb and he looked in and saw the grave clothes lying there and the way that things were set up there, he was the first one to believe that Jesus had risen from the dead. Now he's the first one to recognize that that's Jesus standing on the shore. This great catch of fish, you remember beforehand, it's got to be Jesus. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, and of course, he starts thinking, "Yeah, that's got to be, of course, that's Jesus." He put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea. You see, he wanted to get to Jesus, and he wasn't going to wait. He was going to be able to swim faster than it would take the boat to sail with all that catch of fish back to the shore. And his first priority, I want to get to Jesus. So he jumps in the water and he goes and he swims and he gets to Jesus first. The other disciples came in the boat dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, about 100 yards off. Now, notice what they find here when they get to the shore. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." You see, Jesus was already prepared to provide breakfast for them. Do you remember some years before, he had fed them and a crowd of 5,000 people with a small amount of bread and 2 fish. Here again, Jesus is providing for their physical needs, but he says, you can come add some of yours to it. Bring some of these fish that you've just caught. And here they sit down and they have breakfast with the risen Savior on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish. And we're told exactly how many, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now, none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew that it was the Lord. And here they're with him. And think about Peter and his deep love for Jesus. He knew he had made such a terrible mistake running off and leaving Jesus. Then when he tried to follow him into the courtyard of the high priest and people began to question him that he was one of his disciples, and he denied that he even knew Jesus, and then that terrible rooster crowed. And he went out and wept bitterly. And yet Jesus was willing to forgive him for such a terrible offense. There was a huge amount of love for Jesus in the heart of Peter. And now he is with the one that he loves. And sitting on the shore of the Sea of Galilee after just having caught a huge amount of fish. Obviously, Jesus was the one who caused this great catch of fish. But now it's time for an important question for Jesus to ask Peter, and some very important things for him to consider in this situation, at this place, and at this time. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." Now, I don't know if you have ever had someone just very clearly and point blank ask you, "Do you love me?" But Jesus asked Peter, "Do you love me?" And he even said, "Do you love me more than these?" Now, there is some discussion as to what Jesus meant when he said these. He could have meant all of the boats, the net, the fish, the way of life that was so familiar to Peter. He could have meant all these other of the disciples, his friends, his closest friends in the world sitting around him. Could have meant all of those. But he looks around and he said, "Do you love me more than these?" You see, Peter needed to understand and to affirm that he loved Jesus more than anything else in this world. And so he was asked. Now, Jesus never asked a question that he didn't already know the answer to. He was not asking it because he wasn't sure. It was important for Peter to ask this question of himself and to give a clear answer to the question. And when he said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you," he was telling the truth. He really did love Jesus. And he loved him with all of his heart. And yes, he did love him more even than the boats and the nets and the fish and this way of life that was so familiar to him. so much a part of who he was. Yes, he did love him more, even though he obviously, these were the things that he loved in life. These were the people that he loved in life. But he needed to affirm that Jesus was first. And he was telling the truth. And he knew that Jesus knew people's hearts. If he knew anything, he understood Jesus knows what's in your heart, sometimes even more than you know yourself. Because you see, he just recently, when Peter had said, Lord, I'm ready to go to prison and to die with you, and Jesus said, really? Before the rooster crows this night, you're going to deny me 3 times. Peter would have never known that he was capable of such a thing. But Jesus knew. He knew that his heart was weak, and that there would be a time when his faith was tested and his faith would falter. But he was going to come back around. And Jesus knew this. So Peter knew, I can't lie to Jesus, but I really do love him. And so he says, Lord, you know what's in my heart. You know that I love you. So he was telling the truth. But then Jesus gave a response, something that would prove, would show, would be a reflection of the fact that Jesus really loved, or that Peter really loved Jesus. And so he said to him, feed my lambs. Now we know that Jesus wasn't talking about literal sheep, the animal of sheep. He was talking about his people. And Jesus had referred to himself. You remember when we studied John chapter 10, and he referred to himself as the good shepherd that gives his life for the sheep because he loves them and he cares about the sheep. Well, if Peter really loved Jesus, then he needed to care about what Jesus cared about, care about who Jesus cares about, and have that as a priority in his life, and give his life to doing the work of the Lord. And that was taking care of his people, the people that would come to believe in Jesus as the word was taught. Peter needed to go out and make his life's work no longer being a fisherman, but being a fisher of men. But Jesus didn't even actually use that metaphor in this situation. He describes it as being a shepherd. Now, Peter wasn't a shepherd. That never been something that he had done on a regular basis. That was not his life. But now he was to be a shepherd of the Lord's sheep. He was going to have to change his priorities in his life and put the Lord's priorities first, and be a good shepherd like Jesus was the ultimate good shepherd. Feed my lambs. Well, that's not the end of the conversation. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Wait a minute, hasn't Jesus already asked that question? And Peter gave his response. And Jesus didn't argue with him. Jesus didn't say, no, you don't really love me. You're telling me a lie. No, he knew that. But Jesus asked the question again, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. Again, emphasizing, this is the way you're going to show that you love me. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now notice he addresses him as Simon, son of John, in a very formal way in which it would mean that something very important was going to follow. I don't know if anybody has ever addressed you with your full legal name. My first, middle, and last names are Philip Brentley Missildine. And there's not many times that someone addresses me as Philip Brentley Missildine. But for many of us, our mothers, if we were young, and if they addressed us in that way, usually it meant maybe we were in trouble about something, or it certainly meant you better listen to what mama's about to say. But Jesus says this to get Peter's attention, to let him know something very important is about to follow. And so something very important was following. He's asking him, do you love me? For the third time. And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? Now, there is a Greek issue here with the word love. There's actually, Peter has been responding to Jesus with a different Greek word for love than the word that Jesus was asking him. Jesus was using the word agape. Peter was responding with the word phileo, or the form of it. And the third time, Jesus actually says, he changes his word to match Peter's word and says, do you phileo me? Which means a close friendship kind of love. And maybe that's why Peter was grieved. But for whatever reason, the third time Jesus asks him the same question, and the first two times he's given the answer from his heart. And is he questioning? He knows everything, and even says to him that third time, he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Was there a significance to Jesus asking him to affirm his love for Jesus 3 times? We remember the number of times that Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. Jesus is now giving him the opportunity to 3 times affirm his love for Jesus. And Jesus once again lets him know, okay, you say you love me. The way you're going to prove it, feed my sheep. And as the gospel would be preached and people would be brought into the kingdom, that was the Lord's sheep, those who were brought into his fold. And it was going to be Peter's job for the rest of his life to give himself to the Lord's church, to teaching the gospel, to helping the people to grow, to be fed spiritually as an important leader in the Lord's church. And so he says, feed my sheep. Now, Peter was not the only one sitting there. There were all these other apostles in the same scene, in the same circumstances. And you can imagine as Peter is thinking, why is this all addressed to me? But yet Jesus had some more things to say to Peter. And he's not talking to the other disciples at this point. He's just talking to Peter. And notice, after Peter has affirmed his love for Jesus 3 times, 3 times he has been told, feed my sheep. Now listen what Jesus has to say. Jesus says, truly, truly, I say to you, to Peter, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. He goes on to say, or John tells us here, this he said to show by what kind of death that he was to glorify God. You see, Jesus is letting Peter know there's going to be a cost for following me. It's going to cost you your life. And when he describes the stretching out of the hands, that's an indication that Peter would face a death by crucifixion. Now, we're not told specifically of the actual event in the scriptures, but stories have come down through the years about the death of Peter. And as the story goes, he is put to death by crucifixion. And that when he goes to the cross, he says, I'm not worthy to die like my Lord. And he requested to be crucified upside down. And they honored his request, if this story is in fact true. And Peter gave his life for the Lord in that way. And Jesus is letting him know ahead of time, you're going to face a death like mine. You saw me crucified, you'll face the same kind of thing. So loving Jesus and feeding his sheep would come at a very, very high price. But then, after saying by what kind of death he would glorify God, he would be taken as a prisoner. He would be taken somewhere where he did not want to go. He would stretch out his hands, was signifying by what death that Peter would glorify God. And after this, Jesus, said to him, "Follow me." Now, was that the first time that Jesus had called on Peter to follow me? No, of course not. We remember on a similar occasion 3 years before by the Sea of Galilee with a net full of fish that Jesus had miraculously caused him to be able to catch. He says, "Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men." Now, Peter understands a whole lot more than he did about what was involved. And Jesus didn't want to sugarcoat anything. He did not minimize the sacrifice that it would be. He didn't want to make it sound like it was going to be an easy life. No, it's going to be a tough life. You need to know this. First of all, I need to know that you love me more than anything else, that you're going to take care of my sheep. You need to know that you're going to pay the price with your life. Knowing all of these things, he says to Peter, "Now, you ready? Follow me." And as we said, Peter was not the only one there. There were other people around. Peter turned at this point and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following. Of course, that would be John, the one who had also leaned back against him during the supper and said, "Lord, who is it that's going to betray you?" That's the one. When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about this man?" All of this heat on Peter when there's other people around. He looks around, he sees John. He said, "Well, Lord, how about him? Is he going to have to go through persecution? Does he need to affirm his love for you? What's going to happen to him?" Isn't that what we often do? We want the heat taken off of ourselves, and we want to compare ourselves with other people and say, "Well, Lord, I'm as good a follower as this person is. Well, what about me, Lord? I think I'm suffering a lot more hardships than this person who's supposed to be a Christian. Why am I dealing with all of these things? Well, how about him, or how about her?" And Jesus took the statement that Peter made and turned it right back around on him. Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me." You see, basically Jesus is saying, I'm not talking to him right now. If it's my will that he remains alive until I come back again, that's not your problem. That's not your area to deal with. You let me deal with that. I'm talking to you. So I'm saying to you, you follow me. Are you going to do it? Or are you not? And thankfully, Peter did. Now, John lets us know, because of what Jesus said on this occasion, there was some misunderstanding. He says, so the saying spread abroad among the brothers that this disciple was not to die, yet Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? So John's trying to clear that up, that Jesus didn't say that John was not going to die. But I want us to think about some things as we think about the way that Jesus dealt with Peter for a moment. Instead of Peter being in the hot seat and all the attention focused on him, I want us to imagine, what if Jesus was talking to you? I want you to imagine just for a moment that that Jesus chose to surround you with the things that were the most important to you in this life. Now that's different for different people. And for you, it might not be fishing and boats and nets. It may be something different, but for you, I want you to ask yourself, what is it that I love the most in life? If someone was describing me and saying, this is the most important thing in his life, this is what his life is all about, what would it be? Your hobbies, maybe your line of work that you define yourself with, or even the people in your life that you love the most. And then Jesus called your name, maybe your full legal name, to get your attention. Put your name in the blank. Hear Jesus call your name and then ask you, do you love me more than any of these things and any of these people? Knowing that Jesus knows your heart and you can't hide anything from him, would you be able to tell him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you? And if you honestly and sincerely said that to the Lord and you heard him respond back to you, then you take care of my people. You make your life about what I care about, and I care about people, and I want people to be saved. I want you to be saved, but I want you to be all about helping other people to be saved, to reach out with the gospel, to teach those who are lost and lead them to a saving faith in me, and to take people who are already saved to feed them, to help them to grow spiritually so they stay strong and so they don't fall away, serve their needs as they grow, and help them to be able to be productive members of the kingdom of God, servants in my kingdom. That's the way you can show that you love me. You take care of my sheep. But then you hear him say to you, there's going to be a price to be paid. Now, it may not be that you're going to physically die like Peter died as a martyr's death. But you are going to face some difficulties, and it's not going to be easy. A lot of times there's going to be hardships because of following Jesus. Not everybody's going to appreciate the fact that you follow Jesus. But knowing that there are going to be hardships and knowing that there is a high price to be paid, Jesus then looks at you and says, follow me. Now, maybe you want to take the heat off of yourself and try to compare that with somebody else. Well, this person or that person, and what are they going to? And Jesus says, I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to you. If you love me, if you want to feed my sheep, knowing that it's going to be difficult, I'm still calling on you to follow me. You going to do it? Will you follow Jesus? Because you see, John writes this gospel as the summary statement in the last chapter, John chapter 20 and verse 30, where it says, many other signs Jesus did in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and believing you may have life in his name. You say, I believe. Well, if you really believe, you're going to love Jesus. And if you love Jesus, you're going to be all about his purposes of feeding his sheep. You're going to serve him, and you're going to follow him wherever he goes. So if you really believe, it has to show up in what you do. If you believe, are you following Jesus? And that's the way we're going to end this study that we've made of this amazing story of the life of Jesus. Hopefully with our faith strengthened more than it's ever been before, loving Jesus more than we've ever loved him before because of all he has done to save our souls. Knowing that he's risen from the dead, that he has proved that he's conquered death for us, that he is that good shepherd. He has the power of life in his hands. We believe all of that, but then we have to follow up belief with love and service to the Lord. Now, John's telling us the truth. John is inspired by the Holy Spirit, and I want us to go back and to see these last verses that are in the Gospel of John, these last statements that John makes here. Notice what he says. This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. Now, there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Do you believe it? Are you willing to give your heart and your life to Jesus in faith and obedience? I pray that you are. And I pray that you have that kind of faith, that you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. God bless you. Thank you for being a part of this study, and let's keep following Jesus.